Opacity is used to control the visibility of a particular element. It helps with a gradual entrance and gradual exit to prevent any sort of jarring layout movements that may affect the user negatively. We'll start with setting up a touchable without feedback, which we've imported from React Native, and we've also imported animated. In order to use animated styles, we need to use animated view as opposed to a regular view. The animated view just wraps a regular view, and so you can use all of the normal properties that you would on a typical view that are documented in React Native. Additionally, our styles are container and box. Our container is a flex one, which is just a wrapping container that will center our items vertically and horizontally. And our box is just a width and height of 150 with a background color of tomato so that we can see it. To start, we're going to create an animated value on our state. Now, you don't necessarily have to put this on state. It can be put anywhere on this particular component instance, but for the sake of this demo, we will be putting it on state. So we will create a state variable called animation, and we'll create a new animated value. And because we're going to be controlling the opacity, we want the default opacity to be 1 rather than 0, otherwise it would start hidden. And now we'll create a dynamic style. We'll need to create a dynamic style, which is just an object because we are referencing something that is on state or some other instance. So we'll say const animated styles, which will be our variable name. We'll then say opacity because that's how you control the opacity of a style. And then we'll simply pass in this.state.animation. Now we need to apply this particular style that we've created to our animated view. So in order to apply multiple styles to a particular view, we use the syntax array syntax. So now we are applying our animated style with our opacity that is driven by this.state.animation and defaulted to 1 to our animated.view. So when we refresh this, the opacity will still be 1 of our view. Now you can see here, our touchable without feedback is calling this.startAnimation. However, we don't have a start animation function. So let's go ahead and create that. We'll create a start animation and use the class property syntax because that's a default React Native Babel plugin. And this will allow us to bind this particular function to this instance every single time. And that way, when it's bound to this particular instance, that means we can use this.state and or anything else on this that we need to. Now we'll use one of the animated functions, which will be animated.timing. Animated.timing will specify the animation of a single value to another value over a set period of time. So its function signature is animation and then configuration object. So in our case, we want to say this.state.animation. And then we'll provide it an object, and we'll say toValue of 0 over a duration of 350 milliseconds. In order to start an animation, you need to call start. And so now, if we refresh, and we have our touchable without feedback, and we click on our box, it will fade out because it calls start animation. This.state animation will then be animated to 0 over 350 milliseconds. And in our case, we're passing that into our opacity, which is then being passed into our animated.view box. Now let's go take a look at our animation again. When we call start, it will animate everything away. However, when we pass in a callback to our start function, it will get called when the animation is completed. So once this reaches 0 in 350 milliseconds, this function will be called. This then allows us to do other things like start other animations or control some sort of set state. And in our case, what we're going to do is animate the same exact this.state.animation, but we're going to animate it back to 1. So we'll use animated.timing again, pass in this.state.animation, another configuration object. And in this case, because we've animated our value to 0, we're going to animate it back to 1 and do it over 500 milliseconds. And then once again, we're going to call start. So now if we go and we refresh our simulator, we can see that we have our box back. And when we click on it, it will animate away and then immediately come back because the animation is completed, and then we animated it back to 1.